What's up,
Hi,
Hammer?
friend. Oh, not a whole lot. None of
Yeah,
this could
this
have been
is
predicted that star level players would get hurt and miss series. Just saying.
why you think it happened?
Well, I
Like,
think
what you getting at? What you getting at?
I think there's a rash of injuries all the way across the league with in the playoffs. This is always a concern about like putting mandates on players to play. And
Donovan
hey,
Mitchell
look,
didn't follow those mandates.
oh no, he got hurt already. Yeah,
He was
I
out a
said
lot.
I do have the grapefruit bubbly.
So, I mean, yeah, I mean, the obvious answer would be to shorten the season. You know what I mean? But nobody involved, owners and players, are open to giving money back. So, if we're not having that conversation, then we don't need to ever talk about shortening the schedule. So, what's the answer now? Like, if you feel like the length of the season is possibly causing these injuries, like what's the answer?
You can't say the length of the season is too long and then get mad at players who load manage either.
No,
Well,
not at all. But those players still get hurt.
I know load management doesn't work. Like I understand that. I'm just saying you've got to pick a side here.
yeah, I think you could also look at the course of history. Like, players have always played lots of games that had no problems making it to the playoffs. Like, I think you need to look at your data that you've been recording for years and years and say, what does the data tell us about player like health management? What does it tell us about like whether players are in good enough shape? I think that there needs to be like a deeper examination into what, because like all these teams have been collecting data for years, and they will tell you they do not know what the data means. Like the data, like what it is for the predictability of an injury. They don't have like a true test for what's happening and when exactly a player will get hurt and when a player won't. And I think that that data probably needs to be collected league wide and discussed league wide. And maybe there is a solution hiding in there, but part of the solution could be that you're doing too much strength training. Part of it could be that your players aren't playing enough during the regular season and aren't staying healthy enough. As far as like they're not doing the extra work that they need to do to be in tip top shape. But I don't know, like how many years did we not have a 65 game mandate and players started missing more and more games over the last 10-15 years? But before that, we never had a whole bunch of injuries, injury concerns in the playoffs.
Scooter 916 brings up a good point. He says, can they stretch the season out a little bit? I'm with Coach. Way too many back to backs and 4 and 5 nights. I think back to backs where you have to travel should be eliminated. Like back to backs in general probably should be eliminated. But if you're gonna keep them because you got to keep the schedule and everything else like that, should never have to do back to back travels. Like it should be
the Houston gimmick, the Sacramento.
Exactly.
They wiped out 4 games in 5 nights. That's not a thing anymore. There is 5 games in 7 nights, but there is no more 4 games in 5 nights. And so they've tried to alleviate some of this stress, but yeah, I don't know what the total answer is.
I think
But
they'll only be able to do so much because of the demands of venues. Like the Golden One Center isn't the same as Madison Square Garden, right? There's always going to be, hey, we've got to get, a couple of Knicks games in here, but Billy Joel is here for 3 nights. Brought up Billy Joel because I think there's a banner hanging at the Garden for him. But there's stuff like that you have to navigate and deal with, and I think they'll only be able to do so much as a league to work this out. It's why sometimes, man, the Kings just played, as James said, 5 games in 7 nights. Meanwhile, the Lakers haven't played since last Wednesday. That happened a couple of times this year.
What about that weird scheduling anomaly where the Kings had to play in a back-to-back against, I think it was against Dallas, but then Dallas had to wait in town from Tuesday until Friday to play again? There was no reason why they didn't play on Wednesday. Absolutely no reason. Like the Mavericks had all this time off, the Kings didn't. I thought it was just kind of strange.
Yeah. The simple solution would be less games over the same amount of time on the calendar, which would give more rest and you wouldn't be playing as many games. But like I said, nobody that will require um, somebody, if not both parties, to give up money, and neither one of them are doing that. Like if the owners said, they're okay, we can do this, and the players wanted to do it, that money would come out of what the players make. Like the owners aren't going to be like taking less money; they would take the money from what the players make. Now the players are making less money; they're not going to try and do that. So that's the solution, and nobody wants to do that. So I think they kind of live with what it is right now.
James,
Yeah, I don't.
which result? Sorry, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I said I was gonna say I don't know what the real issue is here because I don't feel like players are playing a bunch of extra games. Like again, the playoffs drag out, and so it's not like they're being rushed. But like what we're seeing from the Knicks is like completely predictable. This is like Tom Thibodeau running a team off a ledge like he has multiple times in the past. But the rest of the league as a whole, I don't know what the deal is, whether it's just players don't feel the need. Like maybe it's partially because salaries have gone up so much, and players are comfortable like saying, "Oh no, I'm not going to go." And I don't know if that's the case, but I also know teams hold players back, and we grew up in an era where it's like, are you hurt or are you injured? If you're injured, I'm going to take you to the hospital. If you're hurt, like rub some dirt on it, let's go. And I think that mentality is lost on a lot of players at this point, but I don't know what the solution is.
You know what I think the issue is, to be honest with you, and it kind of sucks that I feel this way and it might actually be right, is I think these guys play too hard. Like when you think about how hard they play, and a lot of it has to do with the data, the game film, social media, all this other stuff. If Donovan Mitchell wanted to basically not play any different defense on a game on December 17th, they would light his ass up on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And his coaches, no, we seen every second of your game, and you didn't close out here, you didn't help here, you didn't do this and that. So like sometimes these guys get shamed into like having to play like every game is a playoff game. And that's, you can't tell me that's not a lot on the body. Like to do that 82 times. And you can't tell me that in before all this technology and before social media and all this other stuff that um, just throwing on it, Mitch Richmond made every defensive rotation every single time and didn't maybe sometimes jog up the court, or if he didn't have it that night, preserve his energy on the defensive end so he could score all this other stuff. Like you can't hide now. Basically, that's what I'm saying. You can't hide in today's game. And you either get shamed into playing like hard every single night, or like just the way the game is played. Like you have to play like this super high competitive level basketball every single night. And I think it wears their bodies down.
Yeah, I don't know, man, because that's like saying that players in the 80s and 90s didn't play hard. I
Well, they
mean, look,
didn't play hard on defense. Not every night. We didn't play hard on defense
yeah,
in the playoffs.
The
Damien, we got the
finals.
we got the
They
footage.
didn't play
They're
hard in the
standing
finals.
around on defense.
Yeah.
Like nobody's in help side. Nobody is like ready to rotate. Like,
The game is a lot different than
yeah.
it used to be.
no, that's true. But I remember like a guy like Latrell Sprewell. I bring him up all the time because he played so many more minutes than almost anyone else during his era. He averaged like 41, 42 minutes a game, like multiple seasons.
Mhm.
Like that dude was a two-way player. I mean, he played hard on the offensive end, and he played even harder on the defensive end. And like, I don't remember this being an issue with players. Of course, there are players who get hurt. That's not a question. There's always been players who get hurt,
Mhm.
but I just don't remember it being so prevalent where it feels like it's all the time. And we are coming out of like a global pandemic where for years players weren't doing as much off the court because they couldn't. They were limited. But I still I'm not sure, and we could talk about like AAU being year round and all that stuff. And maybe this is like the equivalent of like baseball's Tommy John injury, but I don't know. I just don't see it. Like it feels like something happened here this season where players were required to play more games if they wanted to be up for like massive amounts of money in their contract extensions. And lo and behold, some of the players weren't ready for the rigors of this, and some other players who were never ready for this and who never played a bunch of games, like it showed up. A guy like uh, Kristaps Porzingis. Okay, is anyone surprised he's not playing? Because I'm like he's done this a bunch of times in his career. This is kind of like who you are. But I don't know. It feels like just more injuries this season than I remember in the past, especially late in the year.
Yeah, certainly a lot of injuries right now in the playoffs with the Knicks' whole season unraveling in front of them with injuries. And, of course, we've got the news that Donovan Mitchell will, in fact, not play tonight when the Celtics take on the Cleveland Cavaliers in Game 4 of that one. James, which result were you most surprised in over the weekend? And it can be a cumulative result, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Or were you not surprised at all?
No, I mean, look, I'm surprised that the Knicks are tied with the Pacers, but not really because the injury bug, the wheels are falling off that bus. And that's what happens when you drive on it with like 3 flat tires and go 100 miles an hour for 6 months. So that's one thing. Outside of that, I'm glad we're getting good competitive basketball. I like that, Boston isn't just going to, they probably are now, and they probably would have anyways, but they're just going to run over the Cavs. But they still snuck a win in. I'm glad to see that Michael Malone and his staff were able to figure out what exactly it was that Minnesota was doing that was just wreaking havoc on their offense and sort of, get right. And so that series is becoming a series. Overall, again, I'd like to see what's going to happen with OKC and Dallas. I think that's the series that everyone looks at and sort of the unknown series, like what is going to happen here. All the other series, I think, are kind of understandable, but this one is, I think it's a team that's super young and how do they handle things, and a team with veterans that you expect them to show up on certain nights. So yeah, I think it's been good basketball, and I think this is good for the league. What we're seeing right now, whether it's big market, small market, at least we're getting some like fun basketball to watch.
Were you surprised?
But the Nuggets series for sure. And I was just about to say James was one of the guys who wasn't making their tombstone just yet. When they went down 2-0, he said, still want to see something from Denver. And I thought they were finished. I was surprised that they won both games the way they did. They were pretty dominant in both of those games against Minnesota. That was surprising to see on my end. And not because Denver aren't champions or anything like that, but I thought Minnesota had figured some things out and was just playing at a higher level. And for them to turn the tables the way they did, I thought that was really impressive. It surprised me a little bit. And I got to salute the champs for that.
Yeah, it really does feel like that they were missing something, like schematically. And then given it days to look at film, really break it down, you were able to see, again, like how did they take away the Aaron Gordon lob? And then how did it show up last game? And he's 11 of 12 from the field. Like there are certain things that Minnesota was doing, and whether they got away from what they were doing that was successful, or Denver figured out like the counterpunch, like that to me looks like a really, really good chess match. And to me that's good. That's good. We're seeing, when do you see a team lose the first 2 at home and then win the first 2 on the road in a series like this? It's pretty crazy. So it's good. I think we should want to see good basketball at this point in the season.
Yeah, that scenario definitely doesn't happen a lot. But Mike Malone has talked about it. Like, what do you think about your boy? He's constantly referencing being a champion and how champions play, championship confidence, championship mentality. Do you think he's sending a message to his team, or do you think this is they just have? And I actually feel like it's this one. Listening to Nikola Jokic talk, that this team has an extreme level of confidence, and they're very much in the no, we are the champions, and being down 2-0, dropping two on the road, or dropping two at home, that's not a big deal. We'll just get the next two. We'll get the next three. We'll get the next four.
Yeah, I think a little bit of that is Michael Malone speaking something into existence. He's giving his team like extreme confidence and, the belief. But I also like, look, Michael he's Brennan Malone's son, and Brennan Malone was a champion, and now he's a champion. And it's something that, the legacy of who he is as a basketball player, as a basketball coach, it really does play into his family legacy and, the want to carry on this torch. And so I think Michael believes that that's who he is, and he wants his team at all times to feel like that's who they are. And it's the same thing. It's why Mike Brown sat here and talked about, we don't just want to be a playoff team, we want to be a championship contender early in the season, because a lot of time that's the confidence that you have to like put into a team. And what you hope is that there isn't a point in the season where reality like overcomes like what possibilities are out there, which I think kind of hit the Kings at some point this season, where they realize that, okay, this isn't going to work. And then it becomes really, really hard to continue to push the guys in the same exact way when, they're all basketball junkies. They know what they're up against. They know where they're at in the standings, and they can see the games that they lose and the competition they lose to. The reasons why they lose games, whether it be like the bad, like let off the gas games, or those games you get to where somebody's just too long and athletic and you can't beat them. So I think there is a certain amount of like that's part of being a coach. And I've never ever understood why some people say, coaching only matters a little bit at the NBA level. I disagree 100%. I think coaching means a ton in the NBA, and that's why the Miami Heat are always great. It's why, you just look around the league, how many of these coaches that are just, the San Antonio Spurs have had a down couple of years, but I think 39 of their first 41 years they're in the playoffs. And a lot of that is with, one coach at the helm, half of that is. And so, like, it does matter. Coaching matters, and you gotta, whether it be Malone pushing his Nuggets or teams that are on the peripheral trying to get in, there's a mindset. And it's look at the Oklahoma City Thunder. They played the exact same way for the last 3 years. They're just waiting for their players to get better. And that's why they're in the position they are, because they've got such a system and such an accountability, and guys play hard and guys are focused. They don't let off on plays. They don't give in the last minute and a half of a game. They keep fighting all the way to the end. And now all of a sudden your talent level reaches a certain point where you can compete with anyone with that type of mindset. And yeah, I think coaching means a ton.
Yeah, that's a series we haven't really talked about yet today. You're talking about the Oklahoma City Thunder, and now you've got the Dallas Mavericks up 2-0 on them. And Hammer, I told you, and Casey and I talked about just briefly as we mentioned that series. I thought what Luka did the other night was really impressive. I thought the fact that he pulled back, because sometimes that can be the downfall of Luka Doncic and thus the Dallas Mavericks, is he's going to get his 20-plus shots, whether he's hitting them at a 50, 60% clip or a 10% clip. Yeah. Last night, he wasn't even necessarily bad in Game 3. It's just Kyrie was cooking. Mm-hmm. So was PJ. And Luka led him. And that's a even if it's a one game only, that's a sign of growth for Luka Doncic.
Yeah, I remember telling you guys that I had someone in Dallas talk to me about their team and said that the players got a taste of what it was like to play with Luka, to play with Kyrie Irving without Luka, when they first traded for Kyrie. Luka was out, and all of a sudden, everyone found their joy in basketball again. And I think that we're slowly, if you look at the stats from last season to this season, where of course everything fell apart last season as that team, again, we talked about this last year. It was everyone was worried Kyrie was going to go in and like blow up the Dallas Mavericks because he's some nefarious dude who believes in flat earth and won't get his vaccine, and like he's a screwball and all this stuff. And then that wasn't why he was tearing apart the Dallas Mavericks. He was tearing apart the Dallas Mavericks because he was showing them a brand of basketball that was like a lot more fun to play that didn't involve Luka. And if you look at the way that the stats show you this year, and there was that piece by Howard Beck where he talked about Luka being like the least impactful superstar and MVP candidate that they're like, since the only other player that's like him is Derrick Rose. So he's like a +1 in the on court, off court over the last like 5 years of his career. And that shows you he barely has any impact on winning. And then this year, the second half of the season, he finishes like a +14 and like a 9.6 positive for the year. There was a switch that went off in Luka midway through the year where he started to understand that what Kyrie does is similar to what he does, but it's different. He empowers players in a different way. And, we can talk about, guys who score 30 and guys who score 15. And you remember all the points the guy who scored 15 scored and very few of the guy who scored 30. But I would say the same thing goes for assists. There are guys in the league that get 10, 11 assists per game, and they're almost hollow assists. They're not empowering someone. They're bailouts. They're, the only reason it's working is because a coach drew it up that way. And then there are other guys who go out and every one of their assists matter in some specific way, which is Kyrie. And Luka can stuff the stat sheet, but I think Luka's starting to figure out that stuffing the stat sheet has to come in the right way. And I think he's starting to figure it out.
Yeah. Well, and then that team is getting production from a guy like PJ Washington, who's single-handedly kind of changing that series with the way he's able to play. And he looks great. He looks super comfortable out there. Averaging, I think I saw 20 points per game in the last 2 games. I mean, that is more than anybody could ask for from PJ Washington and expected from him.
Yeah, no, but PJ Washington did that to the Kings one game. That he got that high pick and roll with Luka and just kept hitting threes. I think one game he scored 14 against the Kings in that series when there was 2 games in 4 days against Dallas. But then the next game he scored 7. And that's always a problem. If PJ becomes a reliable scorer like that and doesn't, kind of go in the mode of Harrison Barnes, then he can be a difference maker in that series. He's a really good basketball player. And he looks like he's lost a ton of weight. Like he just looks like he's in great physical shape, where that wasn't always the case when he was a younger player.
James Ham is with us. We'll shift from the NBA directly to your Sacramento Kings here when Dylan and Casey return with our insider James Ham here on Sacramento Sports Leader ESPN 1320. Marvelous.
Yeah, Blake Cunningham made a good. He sent me a note on Twitter, and he said one of the Dallas games was on NBA TV, and the other was on ESPN, the Tuesday and Friday. That's where, yes, I remember that, but I also say I don't care. Like, one team shouldn't have to play on a back-to-back when another one's sitting there on the road in their home city for 4 days.
You tell
Don't
them,
have
James.
them as national TV game, if that's the case. A national TV game shouldn't dictate that a team has to play a bad schedule.
Yeah.
Well, and also that didn't have nothing to do with TV. TV just picked the games that were already on the schedule. Like that gap right there was already there.
Sometimes that's the case. Other times they're like, hey, we have to fit this in. Like we need a West Coast team on a Tuesday night because that's where their national television schedule is. The fact that the Kings got better is really good for the NBA because it gave them another option on a Tuesday night and a Friday night. It's not just all the Warriors
They
and
need
Lakers and
us.
Clippers. Yes, I agree.
They need us.
Leezy points out that a lot of these guys are repeat offenders. I agree, like Embiid, Kawhi, Zion, but Embiid is like a gigantic man who started to break down before he even got in the league. Kawhi and Zion have been like predictably unhealthy players for the last 5 years. How many times did Zion get an injury that was supposed to be like 2 to 4 weeks, and next thing he's out 3 months?
Man, Zion Bagley the third. Jeez.
Yeah. Well, some players are injury prone. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And some players have somebody in their ear saying, "Hey, yeah, you know, you probably don't want to go out there and risk it. You know, what's this team done for you? You got another big contract coming up. You need to make sure that you're good to go for another 8 years so you can make as much money as possible."
Malcolm, I'm not really a fan.
Oh,
I've accepted it
don't listen to
more.
that, Malcolm. It's a good look.
I've accepted it more in recent years, but
Got to be a clean shoe though.
yeah,
I
don't like.
Got to be like a solid Air Force One or something.
I'm old school and probably in the minority with that, but I've accepted it more in the
You're definitely
recent years.
In the minority.
Old school, man.
I would rather see, especially like you see teenagers do it all the time. Like going to prom is to show you like what dressing up is. I'd rather see them dress up. Somebody asked.
Dressing up is subjective.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, if you're going to wear a tux to prom, like I don't want to see a pair of Air Force Ones.
Is that what your boy wanted to wear?
No, mine were, well, he didn't go to prom because he did go to prom as a freshman, but he was in the pandemic, so they lost prom for the most part. And when it did happen, it was like very tenuous, so it just a suit required, not a tux. This is a good question for Aldrin J, or AJ as he's known in the chat sometimes.
Hold that thought. Let's do that one on the radio. Let's do that one on the radio. That's a good one. We'll be back in a couple seconds. All right, here we go, Hammer. All right, I think James was about to cook. Aldrin J had brought up a message, a conversation that we were having earlier. Hammer, would you rather take Paul George or Brandon Ingram?
Yeah, right from the Matthews mattresses Shaddy House. There we go.
Indeed. Shout out Matthews Mattress, same day delivery available.
That's right.
Also wouldn't tell you they're going to deliver something on 3 days notice and not deliver it. That's not what Matthews Mattress would do. That's what happens when you deal with big chains. That's what they do. No, sir, your furniture is still in transit.
That's crazy.
From Utah.
Matthews and thank you for calling us so we can give you the update.
Thank you. I had to call you and sit on hold for an hour. Meanwhile, it's the hottest day of the year, and I'm out here sweating my ass off trying to move boxes.
Don't forget they hung up on you the first time, too.
They did.
Boy.
Sorry, James. Yeah.
Touched the nerve.
Yeah, a little bit.
Ah,
Little bit. Little bit. But yes,
uh,
Matthews Mattress would never do that. Go ahead.
yeah. I mean, I think to get back to the question, Paul George or Brandon Ingram, like, look, I think Paul George is a better player. He has been a better player throughout his career, but at 33, I just have a difficult time believing that you're going to get value out of him, especially with his injury history and sort of his mentality shift. Which his mentality shift to me is totally fine, but like if I'm going to invest $50 million in a player or 60, I want him to not worry about how old he is, and worry about like where he's at in like the grand scheme of things. I want him to go out there and play as hard as he can every night and try to like do a LeBron James impersonation. But and there are some holes to like Brandon Ingram's game. There are some things I don't like too. There's some questions about like how motivated he is and all that stuff. But like I think when we talk about players who are obtainable, that's someone I think the Kings have to look at because we always wonder like who's going to be available this summer. And
Mhm.
last summer, Brandon Ingram wasn't going to be available at all. And all of a sudden, he is. He's totally available. And it's going to be like they're motivated to move him because they have a young player coming up that's plays his position and is going to be cheaper long term and, less injury history. And they're all ready to go in on Trey Murphy. So if I'm the Kings and Brandon Ingram, who just happens to fit like 6 of the major boxes you need to fit that you need to check this offseason, man, I'm
Mm.
all in. Like I don't know what it takes to get, and we talked about it on the insiders with Kyle. Just sort of like it's probably not going to be a team like the Kings can't come in and just make an offer to you. Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, a team like the Kings, they can offer, 3 first-round picks and a couple of players to match salary, but that doesn't seem like where the Pelicans are. The Pelicans are kind of in the same position the Kings are, except for they beat the Kings 6 times in a row. They're a team that's wanting to extend their playoff run, that wants to get better, that, is gonna use Brandon Ingram as a former All-Star who's 26 years old, who can make a big impact on their assets. Like they've got a group of assets and they're going to want to go get a player. So that's why I think if the Kings are going to go get a guy like Brandon Ingram or going to go try to get a guy like Brandon Ingram, they need to be very, very creative in how they do that. And sometimes that means you need to find teams out there that are like you need the team that's willing to throw everything away, that's willing to start over fresh. And that's why I bring up the Atlanta Hawks, because I think the Atlanta Hawks are a team that are really, really close to like, imploding. And they just won the number 1 pick in the draft, which to me is like that's not exactly a huge victory, but it is a victory nonetheless. Um, and that victory pushed them to like 182 million in dedicated salary for this season, which is $10 million over the luxury tax and like 4 million, 5 million over the first apron for a team that might win 40 games. And that's not a good place to be in. So I would, if I'm the Kings, I would be looking for a team like this who has a star or star level player or two that they might be looking to move off of in their rebuild and trying to load them up with first round picks. And that's where I think that's where I came up with that trade, which was just like an example of something that the Kings should try to pursue. And it's like Brandon Ingram to the Kings, Trey Young to the Pelicans, Harrison Barnes, Davion Mitchell, Chris Duarte to make the money work. It also saves Atlanta some money long term. And then the Kings would, in that scenario, pull their protection off of the 2024 pick that they already owe to Atlanta, and then give them a 26 and a 28 first round pick, and then make the Pelicans kick in a first round pick as well. So now, Atlanta's coming out of that deal with some cap relief and a couple of players that can help them for a season or two, but also 3.5 or so first round picks between the one that they're already owed from the Kings and then 2 more and then one from the Pelicans. So I don't know if that's going to be something that would appeal to any one of those teams, but that's kind of the complexity that I believe the Kings are in, where they have to find ways to go out and get a player by using teams that have a need that they can fill, and then working to get a player that maybe they don't have the true assets to go acquire right now themselves.
So like I told you earlier, I like the trade, the depth of the trade, and everything as well. I just wonder, and you could help me out with this. You laid out why they would bring Atlanta in, and that makes sense as well. But what if they didn't want to deal with Atlanta? Do you think Harrison, Davion, Duarte, the 13 this year, and then I don't know, what would it be, like 27 and 29 would be available to them to use as future first round picks? Do you think that would possibly be enough? Because while New Orleans can say they want a star in return or something like that, they're not dealing from a whole lot of leverage because of Brandon Ingram's contract situation. So, and I always thought that's what kind of brought him back into the Kings sphere, just in general, because he's not somebody that's locked up long term. There's going to be teams that may not be as quick to get into the sweepstakes because they feel like they don't want to get into a trade situation and give up assets for someone that might leave, or B, why not just wait till he's a free agent and I can get him for free? So that, and where the Pelicans will be looking to make that deal is with somebody that might be a little thirsty, like the Kings. So is there a scenario where they cut out the middleman, which is Atlanta? Even though in your scenario, I feel like it might be easier for everybody, but just asking, cut out Atlanta as the middleman and just New Orleans and the Kings work on a deal.
Okay, so your question there is complicated. Like, first of all, no, I don't think New Orleans has taken 2 first round picks and Harrison Barnes and a couple of players
There'd be
for
three. There'd be
Brandon
three.
Ingram.
You get this year and you get whenever the other ones that you can trade, 27, 29. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But
So again, the problem is they can't give up. Well, they could give up this year, like on draft day, but they could also give up 20. I think it'd be 27 and 29. Yeah. So they could do something like that, but I don't think that's not going to help New Orleans today. We've heard in the past that New Orleans they had dangled maybe Brandon Ingram in a trade with Cleveland to try to get Jared Allen at some point. Like, they understand they have a need at the center position. They probably have a need at the point guard position. Overall, they need more scoring. Overall, they need more 3-point shooting. So
Alex
even
Len, Davion Mitchell, and Kevin Herter.
yeah,
Boom.
even a Kevin Herter and Harrison Barnes straight across for Ingram plus draft capital, like, that might help them, like, in the long run, but I don't know that it does. The other problem is, like, you brought it up, that Brandon Ingram's entering the final year of his deal. So I'll tell you 2 things about that. Number 1, the Kings are never gonna have cap space again. Like, so they're not gonna be able to go out in free agency. I mean, not again. There will come a time where they do have cap space, but I can't tell you when that's gonna be. Because if you go into this offseason and you bring back Malik Monk, then it's going to be forever that you're not going to have cap space, right? But you also already have a 40 million that goes up to like 43 and Sabonis. You have a 37 that goes up to 40 and then way up higher and De'Aaron Fox. You have Keegan Murray salary that you're going to have to pay for 2 years from now. There's not going to come a point where the Kings are a true cap space team anytime in the next 5 years, unless something dramatically changes with who their sort of big 2 or 3 is on this roster. So saying like, well, we can't just wait until free agency. That's not going to work, because Brandon Ingram's going to require $30 million, $40 million, whatever it might be, and you're not going to be able to do it. The other thing is, like, NBA circles are really small, and so when you're talking about a player like Brandon Ingram, who is represented by Jeff Schwartz. Jeff Schwartz has not often been a friend of the Kings in previous regimes at all. But at this point, Jeff Schwartz does have Malik Monk as one of his players. And so that tells you that there's a possibility that you might, in passing, be able to have a conversation where you would know whether you could get Brandon Ingram to sign a long-term extension or what that extension might look like. And the Kings aren't going to make that deal if they don't have a good idea that Brandon Ingram's sticking around. There's also the point where if you get to a certain point in a deal, the Pelicans as a team could go to the Kings and say, look, okay, we're ready to do this thing. If you would like to have a conversation with Brandon Ingram, you can. And that's where you could sort of cement an extension with Brandon Ingram as your player moving forward, that you could, basically trade for him and then a couple of days later turn around and give him a long-term extension.
Jeff Schwartz.
Anyone else you represent, by the way?
No. Jeff Schwartz is the #1 agent on Hoops Hype, and he represents, like James just said, Brandon Ingram and Malik Monk. He also represents Harrison Barnes and Marvin Bagley.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, look, they just got a deal done with him last summer with Harrison Barnes.
True.
Like, and it went great. Like nothing got sketchy during those negotiations at all.
Yeah.
But look, we showed. They
didn't go.
Right, we'll take care of it.
They didn't ghost them for 2.5 weeks. That definitely didn't happen.
Yeah. No, I think there was
sitting around. I hate this goddamn organization. I swear to God, I hate them.
No, I get that. I get that. There's also,
Harrison, but I hate these guys.
Years ago, there was a time when I think Jeff Schwartz in the 2017 draft had Jason Tatum and Jonathan Isaac, and he wouldn't bring either one of them to Sacramento for a conversation. A lot of that is like posturing by an NBA, agent who's saying, I think both of my guys are going to go in the top 4 when you're the 5th pick. But yeah, there's always been a little bit of an uneasiness there in past regimes. I don't know if that's still the case. Like, we've seen enough work here between this group where I think that they will at least have an understanding of where Brandon Ingram is and what he wants moving forward. So,
Jeff Schwartz, 37 NBA players, 9 All-Stars, 3 maxed out players. Like I said, he's the #1 ranked agent on Hoops Hype.
Interesting.
That 9 All-Stars looks to be by far the highest amount. I think the next one might be Rich Paul with 3.
Yeah, and someone else here in the
Young, LeBron, and Anthony Davis.
Yeah, and Trey left.
Trey left. Yeah.
Well, he's got Rich Paul has De'Aaron Fox.
He's all-star.
Yeah, Michael from the Matthews Mattress Chatty House. I thought moving forward the cap is going up quite a bit, so spending how much cap goes up, and they'll have space in the future. No, the NBA is going to basically raise the salary cap by 10% every year, and then whatever money that isn't equal to that is going to be handed back to the players to be redistributed after the fact. So what that kind of means is that, you're going to have like the salary cap will go up from, like, it's at 141. So 10% of that is what, 14.1 million. So it'll go up to 155.2, and then it can go up another 15 million. So 170. So it's going to go up for sure. Right. But it's not going to take like a $40 million leap in one season. But then because the money coming in is going to be so much higher, that's going to go back into like a pot and be like, if so a minimum player is making $1 million, he might end up making like 3 million if the salary cap goes up that much, or if the basketball related income goes up that much. It's a little complicated, but it's not going to go up one gigantic like holy cow, I can't believe it just went up $50 million in one season.
And also, like, the Kings kind of, we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. Like, nobody is necessary of the people who you think is the core. They're not really like on the same wavelength contract rise, right? Because like Sabonis is first, and then a couple of years later, Fox's contract comes up. So then you can have both of them, and then a couple years after that, or maybe the same year or whatever, Keegan's contract comes up. And then if everything goes right and we're doing things great, Malik Monk's going to be up for another contract.
Mhm.
And then if we got Brandon Ingram, then he'll be up for. So it's never, they haven't lined up. So you're always going to be paying like 2 or 3 people at least a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the way it costs money to put a winning product on the floor. I mean, look at the Boston Celtics. I haven't looked to see how much that salary is, but you got Tatum, you got Brown, you got Porzingis, you got Drew Holiday. You just gave Drew Holiday a bunch of money. You got Derek White. Like, they have a ton of money going out the door, and that's because they have a NBA championship caliber team. And so, if you're gonna put a team like that together, then you're gonna have to spend.
We're going to spend the next several months going over potential names for the number 13 overall pick in the draft. And James, correct me if I'm wrong, that's a player you don't think is going to step on the floor for the Sacramento Kings.
I mean, I think it's early. Like the Kings, if no one comes knocking for the pick, they're not just gonna say, go full like Mike Tyson Minnesota Vikings and not go run an envelope up to the front.
That was crazy.
That was crazy, wasn't it? Was that the 6th pick and the 7th pick in the NFL draft?
I'm not for sure, but I remember seeing that. That was crazy. They just didn't make a pick because they forgot to get him up.
Yeah, so the Kings aren't going to do that. But I also think, look, it's going to come down to best player available, best player in their mind. They do have their sort of script that they like to stick to, which is players that are mature, that they know what they're getting out of that player. I don't think that they're going to be worried too much positionally with who it is, because let's be honest, right off the top of my head, you could have Sasha Vezenkov, Trey Lyles, Chris Duarte, and Davion Mitchell all just expire at the end of next season. And so all of those players play different positions, or at least somewhat different positions. So, look, the Kings are going to have players step up, and they're going to have holes long term that they need to make sure that they're keeping an eye on, whether it be like a backup point guard spot, or, if you can find a long athletic wing that we keep wishing they can find, or a stretch four, whatever it might be. So I definitely think that there's going to be a lot of this is wide open. And the fact that this draft is so wide open, I don't think anyone is going to look at you crazy if you take someone who someone else has ranked in number 23 overall. If you take them at number 13, this is a one draft where it's like, hey, look, you go get your guy at 13, or trade back, or trade out of this draft into the 25 or 26 draft, so that you have a pick and you can start getting around the Stepien rule type stuff. Those are things that would actually matter to the Kings.
Ronnie James, come on down. You just heard it. James said, hey, just go get your guy.
Just go get your guy.
Go get your
We
guy,
had that conversation. Hey, look, if LeBron James quietly talked to De'Aaron Fox and said, we have the same agent, but said, hey, look, I'll play for the mid-level exception if your team takes my son at number 13. Okay. Yeah, if you're the Kings, you're taking him.
Yep.
I mean, because that's like acquiring LeBron James for the 13th pick in the draft.
Take Bryce, too, if you want. I forgot the young lady's name. You draft her.
Yeah.
Draft all of them.
That's facts.
Savannah.
Come on, man. We had this discussion last week, and James, maybe you saw it today on the show, but you would be astonished how many people are like, nah, he's too old, doesn't fit the timeline. Yeah, all right. Yeah, LeBron James wouldn't play here next year. You go get Bronny.
Yeah. I mean, look, the Kings will be championship contenders next year.
I do think part of because James and Kyle asked earlier, how big of a priority I think it is for LeBron. And I was pretty hard. I don't think LeBron is sacrificing, anything to play with Bronny.
Mhm.
But I also think this loud movement to proclaim that not a top priority, whether it's from Windhurst or Woj or whoever, because they've all said it, is to curb teams like Detroit or maybe Sacramento or a variety of different teams from going to sign Bronny or going to draft Bronny, thinking that they're going to get LeBron James. I think that's his way of kind of quieting that down. Like, hey, don't do that. I'm not going to play for Detroit. I'm not going to play for whoever.
Detroit, man, what a big loser in the lottery.
Yeah, we didn't mention this as some of our, especially our Kings conversation really kind of ran, but it's the Hawks, the Wizards, the Rockets, the Spurs, and the Pistons fell all the way to 5 in the draft lottery. Hawks, Wizards, Rockets, good for the Rockets, Spurs, and Pistons are the top 5 in the upcoming NBA draft.
Not good for the Rockets. We definitely need to get these assets and everything out of the Western Conference. So
that'd be nice.
Not good at all.
Right.
Yeah, I also
bad draft, so it doesn't matter.
Like in this particular draft, if you're the Pistons, you have all these other top 5 picks on your roster, many of which have not worked out so far, that you're already paying, in year 2, year 3 of a top 5 pick, you're paying like 11, 12 million bucks a year. You're starting to look at that and go, okay, am I going to be able to get my dollar amount out of this player? Like then we already saw what moving to number 1 meant to the Hawks. They jumped to 182 million in dedicated salary. That's a lot. That's a lot of money. And so I'm kind of the, I think you can get the same player you might have taken at number 1 at number 5, and you don't have to pay as much. It comes down incrementally as you come down the scale. So that's just my opinion on this draft, though.